somebody actually shared with me this very simple rule of thumb. He says, actually, for most of us, we start working at the age of 20 to 25. And we typically work for about 40 years to about 60 to 65. And the question is, how long more will we live after we retire? Say, typically, our average lifespan is about 80 to 85 now in Singapore. So if we work for 40 years, and we have to sustain ourselves for 60 years, we need to save about 1/3. From the first day we start working, you know.
So have you started that?
But I thought that was quite a simple rule, and that has not even taken into account what Gerard talked about, having to provide for some contingencies, and then about buying insurance early, because the earlier we buy our insurance, actually the cheaper it is.
Yes.
But most of the time, I think difficulties that we face is that we often start too late, and then the prices of the insurance become too high.
To me, the biggest question mark, how do we start planning these kinds of things?
Most of us, when we were young, we won't spend too much time thinking about such things. When the time comes, we will figure it out. But often, I think we underestimate the kind of planning that we need to do upfront. The other thing that we tend to underestimate is also our longevity. If you look at my parents' generation, I think the average lifespan will be, 65, 70 at that age, because they retired at about 55. So it's not for lack of planning. And we have a group of Singaporeans who actually work very hard in their early years. They have planned to retire maybe at 55 or 60, and they have expected their lifespan to be about maybe 65 to 70. Our longevity has gone up. Now, to add an additional 10 years of life requires a different set of planning altogether. And we should just be a bit more prudent to plan a bit further.
In fact, a number of my friends start taking up policies from the time when a child is a baby. So they actually plan, and really is assuming personal accountability for your future and not depend on some external factor, be it government or whoever it is. There are sacrifices to be made.
My wife and I, when I say my wife and I mean my wife, has done. We've bought policies for my children the day they were born, and we made sure that there's a fund set aside for when they reach A levels, when they reach universities, and we are always monitoring this. I think it's important also to keep tab of what the costs are, because as you go along, you realize, oh shoot, I haven't been saving enough. I need to top up a little bit more here. Call your agent again and say, I need to top up this policy or that policy, and then just go with it. But the important is that you have that mindset to save and to have something at the end. And then the other thing also is to realize, when do you want to stop working? Because your retirement age could be
different.
30, mine could be 105. Then, our plans are all going to be different.
Actually, that's an important point. And it all depends on our ability to work and also our desire to work. We must do all our individual planning, as what Gerard was saying. Then the government must come in to take care of those who have tried their best but are unable, not for lack of effort. And this is where we as a society must come together and agree that how we should help this group of people.
Ministers should more be done for the self-employed, because the functions they perform are critical for our commerce. Unlike those who work for a company, no matter how small a company, they enjoy the employer's portion of the CPF. The self-employed do not have that. They are disadvantaged. And yet they are performing a very important function in the whole scheme of things. And there's already a forecast moving forward. More and more of us will be looking for contract work rather than a tenure in a function. Is it something that we should be considering?
In the self-employed freelance space, there's actually all kinds of jobs there. The challenge for our society is to come to some kind of agreement. Which group of self-employed should we prioritize the help? There are self-employed who are the big taukees, and they are probably able to take care of themselves. But then there are self-employed who are maybe the hawker, and they will be trying very hard to make ends meet. But when we say we want to help the self-employed, then we also must think of how we distinguish what sort of help for different types of self-employed. Between the hawker, the taxi driver, or for that matter, the housewife, who is also contributing in her own ways to the country but not earning an income, versus the self-employed who is doing a small business, versus the self-employed who is running a huge business. How do we draw that line? I think it's something that we have to think about going forward.
My point of view is that those big tauke, they're not very difficult to filter out. They're so rich that everybody also know them. So, based on the contribution of MediSave, maximum, confirm. Instead of those, like majority of taxi drivers are struggling to top up the MediSave. I'm sad to say that quite a high number of taxi drivers own the MediSave. They are paying installment in order to renew their taxi license. So this is something that I really worried.
So definitely this is something that I think the government is watching very closely and thinking very hard. How do we, in a very targeted way, help those who need it most?
I myself, I started my own business. It is a struggle having to, for one, think about the liability of my business, running the day-to-day operations, and then also on top of that, think about, okay, what about my CPF contribution? Am I earning enough as a business to have that kind of income where I can split it up into take-home pay and CPF contribution? And beyond that, there are like so many other factors I have to think about. Okay, if I want to get a house next time, you know, the cost of a house is not cheap in Singapore. With all these like different factors in mind and all these costs that a young person needs to consider, how can we start today? Not just financially planning, but I hear a lot about when you retire, you want to have a more holistic kind of lifestyle. I think a lot of young people as well right now, we want to be able to balance that, work-life balance. How do we take all these costs in mind and be able to be prepared for retirement?
It goes down to really a lot of self-discipline, especially more for the self-employed. And the other is about individual choices. You can understand without a compulsory mechanism called the CPF, one will always be tempted to say that, you know, can I just defer these savings to maybe some other time where I can most afford it? Unlike someone who is having the compulsory CPF system that they just take it as part and parcel of their life. For the self-employed, self-discipline is even more important than the person who is having the CPF system. The other point then goes to the choices. It's a very difficult thing, but every decision that we make today has an implication tomorrow. And I always remember what my grandmother used to drum into us. She always told us that life is not just about how much you can spend, it's also about how much you earn. And you have to make the difficult decision on how much you're going to spend from how much you earn and how much you want to save for the future. You have to think for yourself, and if you get married, you have to think for your children and your family. Self-discipline and the sense of individual priority has to be uppermost on our minds whenever we do that.
I wonder if we could actually embark, and this could open another can of worms, whereby it's part of the education system, not primary one, but in the JC, when they can see that line that I'm going to cross over now into the working world, what is it out there? I know there are opportunities, but I also know there are challenges. Somebody like Gerard comes along, does a school talk, and shares his experiences. And this could be an ongoing program where people from different fields who have retired can share what were the obstacles, what they wish they knew then, they knew now, could have helped them along the way.
Or maybe we should just look for a different term to call it instead of retirement, because people see retirement as, I don't know, being useless, being white hat, or call it lifelong planning. So you're planning for your 20s, your 30s, your 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and not put the goalpost that, okay, you're retiring and therefore you're old, and that means something that's so far away. So let's just call it lifelong planning.
Very few of us would have that perspective or sometimes take that step back and say that, what will I do in 10, 20 years time? And some people might even say, well, I don't even know whether I'm still around in 10, 20 years time. Why do I plan so long? Maybe another way is that instead of saying planning 30, 40 years ahead, just have a regular module to help people look 10, 15 years ahead.
I kind of do agree though, because in JC we do learn about economics and, you know, how the world works and the money in the world. It really isn't until you might say it's too late, or I could have started planning earlier, because I didn't really think about the importance of saving and like compounded interest and how that has an effect on retirement yet. So I do think that there is an importance in kind of like at least educating young people, even in JC. I don't think it's too early about the importance.
So I think there's a combination. Certain modules, we must tell you, if you touch fire, your hand will burn. Okay, this you must learn first. Learn already, good. You want more information? There are other modules out there. Go to this website. So it's a bit of both a hybrid.